Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to take a look at the absolute versus the reality check, and we're also going to talk a little bit about different asymmetric shapes. They are both asymmetric, of course. They're both hybrids. They're both fairly long and sharp, and they shape similarly, so we're going to compare and contrast them. At some point, drop down and like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the best bowling ASMR content on the tubes. Then leave me a comment, request, tell me a joke, or just say hi and let me know you're here. Check out the link in the description to Bowler's Mart to get either of these ordered or pick up any of your other bowling needs. I do earn 5% commission made on sales through the link, so supporting them supports me, and you need bowling stuff to bowl, so this kills 2 pins with 1 ball. Also, my code ROSEDOLL10 gets you 10% off at checkout at CoolWick.com, and 10% off is at least 100% better than 0% off, so just use the code. It's down in the description to copy and paste so that you don't spell my weird name wrong. Now, flipping from percentages to decimals and continuing on your math lesson for the day, but bear with me, we'll get to throwing balls at sticks in a minute. They both do have strong asymmetric cores. Now, on paper before drilling, the absolute does have the slightly stronger core. It's got a 248 RG 050 differential and an 021 split or intermediate differential in 15 pounds, while the check has a 249 RG 052 differential but an 018 split. Now, the big difference that I think that you can see here is core shape. Now, when you go to drill into the absolute, on most typical layouts, you're going to miss the core either with the thumb hole if you're a one-hander or maybe with the fingers if you're a two-hander, and this keeps the drilled numbers closer to the undrilled numbers. Now, on the check, with the size and shape of the core, you're just going to hit the core with every hole that you drill. Now, that changes the shape of the core, which changes the numbers and dynamics of the core. Now, if you're interested in learning more about layouts, I do have Storm's pin buffer layout system Trilogy linked in the description below. For now, I'm going to go ahead and continue with the comparison. Now, I've drilled them both the same. 4 3/4 by 3.5 by 3.5 is my typical asym layout that puts the pin in the ring finger and it kicks the PSA out to the side. Now, this makes for a really balanced layout because 4 3/4 on the pin isn't too early and strong, but it's also not too long and forward. 3.5 on the PSA makes it rev up really strong in the mid lane, and then being halfway between pin up and pin down keeps it from being too early and dynamic or too long and smooth. Now, the absolute comes at the reactive gloss surface, and the reality check comes at 4K fast, but I did sand them both down to 1,000 first and then finish them with Storm Step 2 compound to match so that we have a fair comparison. The major difference between these two balls is that the S84 beta cover on the reality check is much stronger than the R2S deep cover that's on the absolute. The check for me is near infinite physics levels of strength, so it's going to be able to get more traction through the oil than the absolute, which is going to need more friction to move. We're on the Kegel Chromium lane condition here at Royal Crest Lanes in Lawrence, Kansas. It's challenge pattern at just under a 7-to-1 ratio, so it keeps you honest but isn't too punishing. It's 42 feet long and 25.5 mils of oil, so it's on the long end of medium length and it's on the high end of medium volume. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is tough to see in slow-mo, so I'm going to go on ahead and keep it full speed. But we're going to see the same shot several times in a row so that you can absorb what I'm saying without having to track and pay attention to several different shots. I'm also going to keep my face and anything else off the rest of the screen so that we can just pay attention to ball reaction. From the straighter zone, they're virtually on top of each other. There's plenty of volume and length on this pattern. They're both long and responsive balls, and they're both polished. Literally every ball we've used on this pattern hooks from this zone because there's no angle to fight. All they have to do is get down the lane and respond on the back end. Now in this next zone, we've got 2 shots apiece. The first one with the reality check, I got it a little wide. Now this isn't rolling out. Rolling out is when the ball burns too much energy responding on the back end and just gives up, hits flat, or generally looks like it dies or jerks and quits. This shot still picks up and hits hard. It's just more of a forward ball roll, or it hooked in the direction of the rotation rather than straightening out or being independently continuous. On the next shot, you can see it's the same angle of rotation. I just don't get it out as far, and it very decisively turns and goes through the deck the way that you want to see. Some people like seeing a very continuous ball motion, but those same people then get confused or upset when they drive by back row pins. Different shapes fit different games and people's eye for ball reaction, but when you correctly match ball to player to condition, ideally you want to see the ball going straight back through the pocket, which is proper deflection. That allows the ball to hit the pins it's supposed to so that those pins hit the other pins they're supposed to. I don't generally like balls that are quick and more forward like this. I tend to like rounder shapes. However, I'm starting to find a lot of value in them on the left side of the lane because there are sometimes I just can't move inside. So having something that's more forward is helpful so that I can kind of get it to stop and shim effectively or trap it. Now with the absolute, I took the opportunity to intentionally get this one further out to see if it would recover like the check, and it does, but this is rolling out. With the added angle, the general volume of the pattern, and having more oil outside than on a house shot, the absolute goes too long before it gets the traction to turn, so when it hits the friction down lane, it's too late and it jerks and straightens out. Now on the second shot with the absolute, I got it in where I got the check, and it responds nearly the same, it's just rounder and smoother. Something else to note is that the absolute was really sharp and angular from that first zone, but now that we've added some angle, it got quite a bit smoother. It still looks good, but this is the tipping point of the strength. The check hasn't lost a step, but while the absolute is handling it, it's visibly slowed. That's not a problem though. Back end is sexy, but control hits the pocket and gets the pins down. Another zone in, and here are another couple shots. I get out too far, and it's the same result as before. The check is just a more forward ball off the end of the pattern to begin with, like I said earlier, but it handles the miss. It handles the out of bounds area and still enters the pins with power and hit. It again rolls in the direction of the rotation. Now it's ugly, don't get me wrong, but this is information. This lets me know I have room out there that I can miss out and still get it to hook and hit. The absolute, however, straightens out when it hits the friction. It goes too far and rolls out, meaning that the ball doesn't pick up and go in the direction of the rotation. The direction of the rotation actually changes and goes more in the direction the ball is traveling rather than the direction it's rotating. I know it sounds like splitting hairs, but these tiny things are what makes the difference a lot of the time. Recognizing them and adjusting appropriately to them is a big part of what makes higher average bowlers higher average. This makes me think of the bowlers that frustrate people because you think that they aren't really that good or that they spray the ball around, but they always seem to be around the pocket or carry well. And most of the time it's because they can pick up on the little things like this and make equipment or lane play adjustments and decisions that allow them to get away with being less accurate. Both of these shots look ugly, sure, but if I'm picking a ball to throw based on these two shots, it's 100% the check because it's about putting X's up on the board. You don't get extra points or docked points based on how pretty it looks. In the same zone again, but with better shots, the check now rounds off a little. Not much. I'm able to still keep my speed up and be really firm with it at the release because I know it's going to hook. Now, something else that's cool to note about this ball is that the labels make the revving very readable. When some brown-nosing jive talk and staffer talks about revving up in the mid lane, whether or not the particular ball they're talking about is actually doing that, it is a real thing, believe it or not, and this is what it looks like. The ball has a consistent and even spin rate for 30 to 35 feet, but you can see that right past about halfway down lane, it starts to rev up. When I've said wind up or spin up before, this is it. This is the ball getting through the fronts, stabilizing, and revving up or starting to spin faster in the mid lane so that when it hits friction on the back end, it's ready to hook and can move. The absolute follows suit, and despite the weaker cover, the core really does get work done. Now, something about tougher patterns, there's more oil outside, but there's also less of it inside. Now, most people call what I'm doing here jamming the ball. I'm being firm with it. I'm almost pushing it through the middle instead of going around it because number one, again, the lower strength of the cover gives me more length, and number two, it already had trouble getting back from the outside in the last zone, and now I'm an arrow deeper. I'm putting more revs on the absolute than the check also, but there is quite a bit of familiarity in the roll between the two balls. On these last two shots, this illustrates something that they've been promoting about the absolute, that the new core design delivers torque without the ball locking up. This is really difficult to describe, but locking up is really similar to rolling out. But I tend to think of burning up and rolling out as more of a cover thing. Burning up is when the cover gets too much traction too early and uses energy before the core has had a chance to get going. Rolling out, like I mentioned earlier, is when the ball burns energy too quickly, responding on the back end or to friction, like it just jerks and stops. I think it's pretty obvious that we aren't having any cover issues with the check. It's been reacting extremely well. So this is just the core generating a little too much torque. This can happen with steeper angles. Asyms are super strong and generate a lot of torque to help force them to move more than symmetrics on the back end. That's the point. Extra aggression. This is more force than I need in this case, and it just winds up a little too much too fast. Realistically, it's splitting hairs versus rolling out, but these two terms are used to describe two different things. Like if I see a ball digging in early and bogging down, that tells me I have too much cover and or too much surface, and that tells me which way to adjust. Or if I see a ball looking good on the way down the lane and then it jerks and dies, that tells me I may not have enough surface or cover because it's either going too long before it gets traction or it's using up all its energy instantly when it hits friction. Most people call that rolling out. Locking up looks like something in between. It clears the fronts fine, then begins to rev and wind up, and then it doesn't necessarily jerk and stop. It just kind of struggles. After throwing several good shots across the lane with the check and seeing it respond well, in addition to the identical shot from the same zone just before that packed all 10 back, now what it really tells me is that the ball's fine and I'm just too deep. But I read or see this as locking up because of more torque than is necessary, so that's going to make me adjust a different direction. Now, just in general as well, the ball motion of the Reality series is more forward rolling due to the amount of torque the core creates. They can be really continuous, but usually that's when there's plenty of volume and length on the lane. Another ball that I can think of that has a lot of torque that can lock up too is the infinite physics. A different way to explain it might be to say that burning up and rolling out is a lot more obvious and a lot more consistent. Like if a ball's burning up, it's just going to continue to puke shot after shot after shot. Or rolling out, the ball's just going to jerk and stop, shot after shot after shot. Locking up tends to go back and forth. The ball will look good on most shots and then just seem to die or give up on other ones for no reason. The absolute, on the other hand, still gets torque, but it doesn't overdo it. It's not so forceful on the back end motion. It looks good, and the lower cover strength helps, don't get me wrong, but that's part of delivering the package. There are some times later in blocks or deeper in tournaments, or even on just crazy dry house shots, when you have to get inside, and most asyms are too strong or are locking up, but symmetrics are too slow and lazy or just don't handle the angle well and you feel trapped. The absolute is the perfect fit here because the cover is designed for less oil to begin with, and at the same time, the core helps it wind up without being so over-the-top aggressive. You can see that when the cover is given enough friction, either by playing straighter or keeping the ball closer to the head pin, that the core is strong but blendy and continuous. This is why I wanted to make the distinction between rolling out and locking up. The absolute leans towards rolling out if it doesn't get enough traction, but is really continuous when it does. The reality check leans towards locking up. It gets plenty of traction, but can sometimes just roll too aggressively. Now back to the horse-faced ginger for a moment. Maybe you think they look the same, and I'm just like the aliens guy with crazy hair or whatever, but I'm just breaking it down the way that I see it. The absolute, for me, or in my opinion, is the perfect step down from the reality check when the check is just too strong or is locking up. You still get that clean and angular look, it's just dialed back a notch. Remember my Bowler's Mart links in the description. Remember my CoolWick code, and also check out my YouTube memberships too, because I've got to pay for the therapy somehow. Thanks to my outstanding members. Thank you for watching, and may the slashy things be with you.